The first time I noticed the missed calls, the number glowing on my screen didn't even seem possible. 28. Every single one from the same people who had dismissed me only a few hours before. My fingers shook as the heart monitor beside my hospital bed kept up its steady rhythm. The sterile room smelled sharply of disinfectant. Tubes ran into my arm. A blood pressure cuff tightened around my bicep in slow, measured pulses. The harsh fluorescent lights above blurred as I blinked back tears I refused to let fall. I kept staring at the screen, the group chat still open, its cold silence sitting there like it meant nothing. My brother's short, dismissive reply, my parents' clipped excuse about a barbecue, and my own quiet response, "Fine." Now they wanted to call? Now they wanted to reach me? Now that whatever had happened had spread beyond that small family thread. But in that moment, I simply let the phone fall against my chest and closed my eyes. I had nothing left in me to give them. 30 hours earlier, everything had started somewhere far less dramatic, at baggage claim in Portland International Airport. The air carried the faint warmth of roasted coffee from a nearby stand, mixed with the sharp, lingering scent of jet fuel that never quite leaves an airport. My body was already beyond exhaustion. 2 connecting flights, turbulence that had kept the crew strapped in, and the constant dull ache from the phantom limb where my left arm used to be. The harness of my prosthetic dug into my shoulder. The skin beneath it felt raw, irritated from hours of friction. When the conveyor belt jerked to life, I shifted awkwardly, bracing myself with my right hand. Suitcases began tumbling out, sliding along the black rubber belt. I spotted mine quickly, oversized, black, with a bright yellow tag. James from my unit used to joke and call it the taxicab, but now, pulling it off the belt felt like trying to wrestle something alive with only one arm. I clenched my jaw and leaned back, using my full weight until the suitcase dropped heavily onto the floor beside me. Sweat dampened my collar despite the cold blast of overworked air conditioning. I paused, catching my breath, then pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the family group chat, the same thread where birthdays were often reduced to quick emojis and my updates from Afghanistan usually sat unread. I typed slowly. Me. Flight lands at 5 p.m. Can someone pick me up? The typing bubbles appeared, then vanished. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. Troy. Busy. Just grab an Uber. Another vibration followed. Mom. We've got a barbecue tonight. Why didn't you plan better? I stared at those words until they blurred together. For months overseas, I had imagined this moment. Maybe someone waiting at arrivals, maybe a hug, maybe my dad standing there, awkwardly holding a welcome sign. I had not imagined this. A rideshare app, a casual dismissal. I typed back just 2 words. Fine. And something inside me quietly folded in on itself. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I simply made myself smaller, the way I had been doing since I was a child. Outside, the Uber line stretched long, winding through travelers dragging their luggage behind them. The late afternoon sun reflected off the glass, forcing me to squint against the brightness. My legs felt unsteady after so many cramped hours on the plane. When my driver finally pulled up, a middle-aged man with kind, quiet eyes, he lifted my bag into the trunk without commenting on my missing arm. I slipped into the back seat, resting my forehead against the cool window and shut my eyes. The ride passed in silence. Every bump in the road seemed to travel straight through my body. My prosthetic pressed painfully against its socket, forcing me to adjust it again and again. By the time we reached my street, evening had settled in. Porch lights glowed warmly from nearby houses. Families gathered inside, laughter drifting into the air. The faint smell of charcoal and grilled food lingered. Barbecues, just like my parents had mentioned. I wondered briefly if one of them was theirs. Inside my house, the air felt stale and cold. I had asked them to adjust the thermostat before I arrived. They hadn't. Mails spilled from the basket near the door, unopened envelopes stacked just as I had left them. The refrigerator hummed quietly, nearly empty except for old condiments long past their expiration dates. I dropped onto the couch without even taking off my coat. The cold seeped into me, but I didn't care. The silence felt heavier than anything I had carried in the field. My eyes finally closed. I woke some time later to the sound of my own breathing, rough and uneven in the darkness. My chest felt tight. My vision flickered at the edges. When I tried to sit up, the room spun violently and I fell back against the couch. A faint beeping sound echoed somewhere nearby, growing louder. My eyes searched until they found it, the carbon monoxide detector flashing red across the room. My phone lay just out of reach on the coffee table. I stretched my right hand toward it. My fingers brushed nothing but air. Too far. My last thought came strangely calm. At least I told them fine. Then everything went black. When I opened my eyes again, the harsh glare of fluorescent lights burned above me. A nurse adjusted the IV in my arm as the steady rhythm of the monitor anchored me back to awareness. My throat felt dry, my head pounded, but my eyes went straight to the phone resting on the tray beside me. 28 missed calls. Troy, Mom, Dad, all within the hours after I had collapsed alone. I let the screen fade and turned my head away. This time, they wouldn't get an answer. Long before Afghanistan, before the prosthetic that now pressed into my shoulder, before any of it, there had been smaller moments, quiet, cutting lessons about what family meant, or what it didn't. I grew up in a 2-story house on the east side of Portland, pale green shutters that always needed repainting, a maple tree out front that scattered its tiny helicopters across the driveway every fall. Inside, everything revolved around my brother, Troy. He was 3 years older, a star pitcher, confident, charming, the kind of person who filled a room without trying. My parents orbited him constantly. I was the quiet one, the one who studied, the one who read novels under the covers with a flashlight. They used to say I didn't need much. They said it like praise, but I heard the truth behind it. One memory stayed with me more than the others. I was 8, climbing that maple tree when a branch snapped beneath me. I hit the ground hard, pain exploding through my arm. At the hospital, after the X-ray confirmed the fracture, my parents left me with a neighbor so they could take Troy to his championship game. "He can't miss this," my mother said gently. I told myself it didn't matter. I was fine. By high school, the pattern was permanent. Troy got everything he needed. I worked part-time to cover my own. When I won a statewide essay competition, my parents clapped politely before leaving early for his practice. I folded the certificate into my bag, my face burning, wondering why I kept expecting something different. College gave me my first sense of freedom, a scholarship, a way out. My father's first question wasn't pride, it was whether it would cost them anything. I smiled and said no. When military recruiters came to campus, something inside me shifted. Purpose, structure, something bigger than myself. Maybe then they'd finally see me. Training was brutal, but it felt like belonging. For the first time, I mattered because of what I could do, not because of someone else's shadow. Deployment came quickly. Afghanistan was dust and heat, endless mountains cutting into the sky. Letters from home were rare, short, distant. Still, I held on to them like they meant everything. Until the day everything changed. The explosion came without warning. Sound, heat, then nothing. When I woke, my left arm was gone below the elbow. I stared at the bandages and thought of that childhood fall. Broken again, alone again. I still imagined coming home, still pictured them waiting, still believed something would be different. But when I landed, all I found were excuses. A barbecue, a busy schedule, an Uber. I typed the same word I had learned to use my entire life. Fine. The Portland terminal buzzed around me as I stood near the exit, gripping my suitcase with my one good hand, trying to steady myself. My body felt like it was shutting down piece by piece. The prosthetic irritated my skin. My throat was dry. Around me, families reunited, laughter and hugs everywhere. And I stood there alone, the word fine echoing in my mind. When my Uber arrived, I forced a smile. The ride passed quietly. The city looked both familiar and distant. By the time I reached my house, darkness had settled. Inside, everything felt empty, cold, forgotten. I checked the group chat again. Nothing. I sank into the couch, meaning to rest for just a moment, but when I woke, the air felt thick, heavy. The room spun. The faint beep of the detector cut through the silence. My phone was just out of reach. I tried to move. My body wouldn't respond. The last thing I saw was the screen lighting up with a notification. I thought of that word again. Fine. And then everything disappeared. When I came to, the sharp scent of antiseptic filled my lungs. Voices echoed around me. My body was connected to machines. A nurse leaned over me, adjusting the IV. "Easy, you're in the hospital," she said, her tone calm and steady. I blinked, disoriented. My eyes landed on the tray beside me, my phone. The screen lit as if on cue. 28 missed calls. Troy, Mom, Dad, over and over, desperate attempts after silence. I didn't touch the phone. I didn't even unlock it. I let the screen dim and turned my face to the ceiling tiles, their grid patterns sharp against my blurred eyes. They wanted me now, but when I needed them at baggage claim, at the curb, in the cold silence of my house, there had only been 3 words: grab an Uber. Lying in that hospital bed, with monitors tracing my heartbeat in neat green lines, I couldn't stop my mind from reaching backward. The present pain was unbearable, but it was the old wounds that began to pulse again, reminding me how familiar this pattern really was. The missed calls piling on my phone felt almost absurd. Why the urgency now? Why the panic after a lifetime of absence? The truth was simple. They weren't panicked for me. They were panicked for themselves, for the way it might look. I thought of the maple tree again. 8 years old, arm broken, left with a neighbor while Troy's baseball team took precedence. The neighbor had been kind, gave me ginger ale, helped me prop my arm with pillows, but the absence of my parents seared deeper than the fracture. I remember the way the fluorescent ER light buzzed, the way the doctor's voice softened when he asked, "Are your parents coming back soon?" and how I smiled weakly and said, "They'll be here after the game." I knew, even then, it was a lie. That wasn't the only time. High school graduation should have been a milestone. I had fought tooth and nail for my place at the podium, valedictorian, every word of my speech carefully written the night before. They showed up, yes, but stood in the back. My father kept glancing at his watch. The moment the diploma was in my hand, they whisked Troy to a tournament across town. No dinner out, no photo, just a rushed hug, a distracted "good job," and exhaust fumes as they drove away. By the time college came, I thought I'd stopped hoping. My scholarship letter should have been framed. Instead, Dad only asked if it would cost them anything. Troy was heading to a private university, his tuition covered by their sacrifices. Mine, I worked in the dining hall, cleaned classrooms in the evenings, juggled shifts between exams. My parents sent care packages to Troy, boxes filled with snacks, gear, handwritten notes. To me, a single envelope with $20 and a post-it, "Make it last." And then there was my wedding day. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd rise to the occasion. I wore a simple dress, nothing extravagant. I wanted them to see me happy, whole, starting my own life. But Mom spent half the reception fussing over Troy's new girlfriend, who wore white of all things, and Dad spent the other half complaining about the cost of the venue. Troy arrived late, unapologetic, all eyes on him as usual. When James squeezed my hand and whispered, "Focus on us," I tried, but the sting lingered. Every big moment of my life had carried that same aftertaste. I was the afterthought, the shadow child, the one who learned to say it's fine even when it wasn't, because demanding more never worked. The military became my escape hatch. The day I shipped out, I half expected at least a small display, balloons, a cake, something. Instead, Mom packed a cooler for Troy's baseball road trip, Dad checked the tire pressure on his car, and Troy himself gave me a half-hearted salute. "Don't do anything crazy," he joked. I boarded the plane with a duffel bag and a hollow in my chest. In Afghanistan, surrounded by dust and danger, I found something I'd never had at home. People who noticed when I was missing, squad mates who counted on me, who cared if I was hurting. We joked over bad instant coffee, cursed the sandstorms that rattled our tents, watched each other's backs on patrol. They became family in ways blood never had. But when the blast tore through my convoy and I woke up staring at a stump where my arm should be, I still called home. I wanted desperately for their voices to anchor me. Mom answered, voice flat. "We're glad you're alive," she said quickly, "but you really should have thought harder about insurance." Dad asked if the Army would still cover my salary. Troy texted later, "That sucks. Hey, guess what? I got a new car." Even then, I typed back, "Fine." Now, staring at the hospital ceiling, I realized how deep that trainee ran. Saying I was fine was muscle memory. It had protected me for years. It was easier than explaining the hollow ache of disappointment. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had been trained to fight wars, to face explosions, to rebuild my life from shrapnel and loss. But the deepest scars weren't from Afghanistan. They were from living in a family where I had always been second place, always the backup plan. The 28 missed calls, they weren't for me. They were for the image of me, for the story they suddenly realized might be told without their input. And they were right to be afraid, because for once, I wasn't going to protect them with silence. The first journalist I ever spoke to came to me by accident. His name was Michael Chen, a local reporter doing a segment on veterans' healthcare. He wasn't looking for me. He was following a paramedic at Portland General, shadowing a shift for background. But he overheard one of them in the break room, voice low, shaking his head. She texted her family for a ride home. You know what they said? Grab an Uber. And then she collapsed alone. I've seen a lot, but man, Michael's ears perked up. He asked a few questions. Later, he came to my room, press badge tucked into his jacket. "Ma'am," he began, careful, respectful. "I heard a little about what happened. Would you be willing to talk?" At first, I wanted to say no, to retreat, to guard my story the way I always had. But then I thought of those 28 missed calls, the sudden desperation after years of absence. I thought of how my silence had always shielded them, and for the first time, I felt the urge to tell it out loud, not to protect, but to be heard. So I spoke, not in anger, but in detail. I described the 30 sleepless hours of travel, the prosthetic strap digging into my shoulder, the weight of the suitcase I could barely manage. I repeated the texts word for word. "Busy, just grab an Uber. We've got a BBQ, figure it out." Michael's eyes widened, his pen scribbling furiously. He didn't need embellishment. The words were damning on their own. The story aired on the 10 o'clock news the next evening. Veteran returns from Afghanistan, left alone at airport. My name was there, my face blurred in B-roll as I was wheeled through hospital corridors. The anchor's voice carried a mix of shock and compassion. After serving overseas and losing her left arm in combat, she returned to Portland last week. When she asked her family for a ride, their replies were dismissive. Hours later, she collapsed from exhaustion and carbon monoxide exposure in her home. The clip cut to the paramedic, eyes somber. Her phone was still open to the group chat when we found her. It broke my heart. Nobody should come home to that. By morning, the story had gone viral. Community Facebook groups shared screenshots. Hashtags began to trend. Wa try Uber, wa no family. Vets deserve better. My inbox flooded with messages from strangers, veterans who knew the sting of coming home unseen, widows who whispered their own stories of neglect, ordinary people offering meals, blankets, even a spare room if I needed it. Meanwhile, my family went into overdrive. Troy called 7 times in an hour, leaving voicemails that started frantic and ended furious. You made us look like monsters. It was just a misunderstanding. You should have told them the full story. Mom's messages came next, a string of defensive explanations. The BBQ was a commitment we couldn't cancel. You know your father's back was hurting that day. We thought you'd want some independence after everything. Dad's voice was quieter, a single voicemail. This has gotten out of hand. Call us back so we can figure out how to fix this. Fix this? That was always their angle. Not support, not apology, damage control. But the genie was out of the bottle now. The community had seen the raw truth. Businesses reached out. A local plumbing company offered a promissory stay at a hospitable home. A local hotel chain extended a complimentary stay until my house was safe. A grief support group left a voicemail inviting me to their next meeting. One morning, a florist delivery arrived at my hospital door. A massive arrangement of red, white, and blue blooms. The card read, "From a grateful neighbor you've never met. Welcome home." I stared at the flowers, throat tight. It was more care than I had felt for my own blood in years. The hospital staff whispered about the story in hallways, some stopping in just to squeeze my hand. One nurse, eyes fierce, muttered, "They don't deserve you." I didn't answer, but the warmth of her words seeped deep. That night, as the news replayed with updates, I imagined my family watching, their phones lighting up with messages from friends, coworkers, neighbors, all asking the same question: how could you? The missed calls kept coming, 28, 32, 35, but I let them pile up. I wasn't going to shield them this time. I wasn't going to absorb the blame so they could stay untarnished. The story wasn't just mine anymore. It belonged to every person who had ever been abandoned by those who should have loved them first, and it was only the beginning. They showed up 2 days later, not quietly, not humbly, but in a rush of perfume and cologne and the sound of dress shoes clicking across the hospital linoleum. My mother led the charge, her voice pitched higher than usual, the way it always was when she wanted people nearby to overhear. "Sweetheart, we came as soon as we could," she said, sweeping into my room with a bouquet of grocery store flowers, their plastic wrap still crinkling. Troy followed, shoulders squared like he was walking into court, not a hospital room. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and I caught a glimpse of a Twitter notification. He'd been reading the comments. I knew that tight, pinched look on his face. Less guilt, more fury that people were talking. Dad lingered at the door, hands in his jacket pockets, eyes darting everywhere but me. For a moment, none of us spoke. The monitors filled the silent, steady beeps marking my pulse. A soft hiss from the oxygen line. Finally, Troy broke it. "This is getting blown way out of proportion." I raised an eyebrow. My voice was soft even. "Is it?" He gestured sharply, as if swatting a fly. "You didn't tell them the whole story. We didn't know how tired you were. You made it sound like we abandoned you." I cut in, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "Because you did." Mom gasped, clutching her pearls like a scene from an old movie. "Now that's unfair. You know we had plans that evening. You can't expect us to cancel every commitment at the last minute. Families have responsibilities." "Families do," I said quietly, "but I'm not sure ours ever work that way." The air stiffened. tension vibrating like a live wire. A nurse stepped in. Then Jessica, the one who had adjusted my IV the night before with such gentle hands. She checked the monitor, her eyes flicking between us. She didn't say anything, but her presence grounded me. I turned back to my family. Do you want me to list them? Because I can. Mom shook her head sharply. Amelia, don't. But I did. When I broke my arm, falling out of the maple tree, you left me with the neighbor to get Troy to his game. When I won the statewide essay prize, you left before my name was even called. At my college graduation, Dad, you asked if it was going to cost you money. At my wedding, Mom, you spent the whole day fussing over Troy's girlfriend instead of me. And when I lost my arm, I lifted the stump, raw and bandaged. You asked if the army would still pay me. Troy shifted uncomfortably, jaw clenched. That's ancient history. You're dredging up stuff that doesn't matter anymore. It matters to me, I said. My voice didn't rise, but the steadiness carried its own weight. And it mattered when you told me to get an Uber after 30 sleepless hours in a war zone. It mattered when you chose a barbecue over showing up for me. You keep saying it's a misunderstanding, but what I understand is that this is a pattern, a lifetime of patterns. Dad finally spoke, his voice low. We didn't know how serious things were. I looked at him steadily. Did you ask? He opened his mouth, then shut it again. Silence. Jessica's hand brushed my chart as she spoke up, breaking the standoff. Amelia, remember what we talked about? The choice is yours. You don't have to decide based on anyone else's image. Mom bristled. Excuse me, but this is our daughter. We'll take her home when she's discharged. Jessica's eyes stayed on mine, calm and steady. That's not how this works. She decides where she goes, who she trusts. For the first time, I saw fear flicker across my mother's face. Real fear, not for me, but for the collapse of the facade she had worked so hard to polish. I'm not going home with you, I said. The words landed heavy, final. Mom's lips parted, outrage trembling there. Troy swore under his breath. Dad stared at the floor tiles. I continued. The community has shown up more in 3 days than you have in 30 years. Strangers brought flowers. A neighbor offered me meals. A support group called to invite me. Do you understand what that means? They see me. You never did. Mom slammed the flowers down on the tray table, the plastic rattling. This is ridiculous. You're humiliating us. I shook my head. No, Mom, you did that yourselves. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the steady beep of the monitor tracking my heart. Finally, Troy muttered, "We'll talk later," and stormed out. Mom followed, heels clacking like gunshots in the hallway. Dad lingered for a heartbeat, longer, eyes flicking to mine. He looked like he wanted to say something, anything, but in the end he only sighed, shoved his hands deeper into his pockets, and walked out. The door clicked shut. Jessica glanced at me, her gaze full of quiet strength. That took courage, she said softly. I leaned back against the pillows, exhaustion washing over me. For once, though, it wasn't the exhaustion of being ignored. It was the exhaustion of finally speaking the truth, and it was the first step towards something new. Discharge day came sooner than I expected. The paperwork was thick, the instructions for wound care and concussion monitoring overwhelming. But what surprised me most wasn't the process. It was who showed up, not my family. Instead, it was Diane, the neighbor from across the street. She knocked softly on my hospital door, carrying a tote bag full of snacks, hand lotion, and magazines. I saw the story, she said, her eyes brimming. No one should go through that alone. If you need rides, groceries, or just someone to sit with, I'm here. I swallowed hard, unable to answer at first. Diane had lived across from my parents for years. We'd exchanged polite hellos, maybe borrowed sugar once or twice. Yet here she was, with more compassion than the people who raised me. The hospital arranged for me to stay in a local hotel donated by a chain that had seen the news coverage. When I arrived, the manager himself met me in the lobby, pressing a key card into my hand. Stay as long as you need. You've already paid more than enough for this country. The suite was warm, with fresh sheets that smelled of lavender and a refrigerator stocked with simple, nourishing food. I sat on the bed, letting the comfort wrap around me, and realized this was the first time since James died, since Afghanistan, that I felt cared for. Not tolerated, not brushed aside, truly cared for. In the weeks that followed, the community became my lifeline. A local plumbing company repaired the burst pipes in my house at no charge. A restoration service not only fixed the water damage, but installed a new thermostat to prevent future freezes. Veterans groups reached out, inviting me to meetings where I met other women who knew the struggle of coming home to silence. I began physical therapy at the VA, learning to maneuver with one arm, strapping on the prosthetic with less fumbling. My therapist, a wiry man named Carl, had a way of making the grueling sessions feel like victories. "You're not broken," he told me once, catching my eyes in the mirror. "You're adapting. That's strength most people never understand." For the first time, I believed him. At home, Diane brought over casseroles, and her husband raked my leaves without being asked. A retired teacher down the block sat with me on hard days, just listening as I rambled about James, about Afghanistan, about everything I'd bottled up. These people weren't obligated by blood, they showed up because they cared. That difference was staggering. My family's presence, when it came, was measured and shallow. A generic "thinking of you" card from mom and dad, a clipped voicemail from Troy, mostly complaints about his coworkers teasing him after seeing the news. None of them ever mentioned the hospital confrontation. None of them apologized. I stopped waiting for it. Instead, I poured myself into something new. With the help of the Veterans Support Network, I created a local fund for female veterans returning home, covering emergency expenses, ride services, even small stipends for groceries or utilities. I named it after two of my squad mates who never made it home. Their faces stayed with me, their laughter echoing in my memory, and I wanted their names tied to something that healed. At the fund's first community meeting, we gathered in a VFW hall, rows of folding chairs filled with strangers, now friends who had rallied for me when my own family hadn't. I stood at the front, sleeve pinned neatly where my arm used to be, and spoke. "This isn't about pity," I told them. "It's about presence, about showing up. Strangers have shown up for me more in the past few months than my family has in my whole life. That's the lesson I carry now. Family isn't always blood. Family is who shows up when it matters." The applause that followed wasn't thunderous, but it was steady, warm. It felt like a circle of arms around me, the kind I'd stopped hoping for from my parents long ago. 6 months later, my garden was alive again. The soil smelled rich, the tomatoes climbing tall with sturdy cages around them. James used to joke my tomatoes could win ribbons at the state fair. As I clipped the first ripe one, juice sweet on my fingers, I whispered his name into the breeze. The house was whole again, pipes repaired, walls fresh, a new sense of safety humming through its bones. More importantly, I was whole again, or at least on my way. Not because of my family's sudden change of heart, they never did change, but because I stopped expecting water from a dry well. That night, I sat on the porch as the sun dipped low, phone buzzing softly with messages from the support group, words of encouragement, check-ins, simple reminders that I wasn't alone. I scrolled past my family's unread texts, the ones that still tried to explain, excuse, or cajole, and then I let the phone rest on the arm of the chair. The truth was clear. My revenge hadn't been dramatic. It wasn't shouting or cutting them off with venom. It was choosing to live well, to surround myself with people who gave freely without condition. It was boundaries. It was peace. And it was mine. When I tell this story now, I think back to that night in the hospital, the phone glowing with 28 missed calls, the desperation finally flowing in from the people who had ignored me when it mattered. I didn't answer then. I don't regret it because for the first time I realized I didn't need their voices to steady me. I had my own, and now I have yours. If you've ever felt abandoned when you needed someone most, I hope you hear this clearly. You are not alone. Family can be chosen. Support can come from unexpected places. Your worth isn't measured by whether those closest to you recognize it. It's measured by how fiercely you continue forward. I'd love to hear your stories. Have strangers ever shown up for you when family didn't? Share it in the comments. And if this journey resonated, consider subscribing, not just for me, but for the reminder that healing is possible even after the deepest scars. Because sometimes revenge isn't fire, it's simply living better, louder, and freer than anyone expected you to. And that, my friends, is enough.